Lady Louise Windsor did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Standing inside a private Windsor drawing room, surrounded by relatives who had spent years avoiding the truth, she looked directly toward Camilla and delivered the sentence no one expected from the usually reserved young royal: "I refuse to let Camilla divide our home." What followed was not merely an argument. It was a family boundary being drawn in public. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla had demanded that Sophie and Edward withdraw from a planned memorial dinner, unless its guest list changed. The gathering was meant to honor family, not settle palace influence. A queen consort is the monarch's spouse, a role with status but no automatic right to control another royal household. That was why Louise's words mattered. She was not challenging the crown. She was defending the family life her parents had built through loyalty, restraint, and service. Sophie reached for her daughter's hand, hoping to calm the moment. Louise gently pulled away. She stepped forward alone, carrying years of frustration behind a controlled voice. Edward watched without interrupting, torn between pride and fear. He knew his daughter had crossed a line the family rarely crossed aloud, yet he also knew silence had become more painful than risk. Camilla froze. The queen consort had expected resistance from Sophie, or a measured objection from Edward, but not this. Charles saw embarrassment tighten her face before anger replaced it. The king said nothing, and that silence deepened the danger. Louise then made clear that the dispute was not about one dinner. She named messages, altered invitations, and pressure that had repeatedly forced her parents to choose between palace demands and unity at home. Edward finally moved. He placed a sealed folder on the side table but refused to open it. Inside were communications documenting changes to family occasions after interventions from Camilla's office. A sealed folder simply meant the papers had been kept closed and protected from casual access. Its presence changed the accusation from emotion into something heavier: a record. Louise looked toward her father and said she could no longer remain quiet after what happened at the previous winter's memorial gathering. Edward lowered his eyes. Sophie's expression changed, while Camilla remained rigid, and Charles understood that the deepest wound had not yet been named. Louise's declaration had shattered the room, but understanding why she risked everything required, looking at the three people caught between a daughter's loyalty, a mother's pain, and a queen consort's determination to control the family circle. To the public, Lady Louise had always appeared safely removed from palace conflict, a thoughtful young woman shaped more by family responsibility than royal ambition. But inside Windsor, her silence had never meant ignorance. She had watched Sophie absorb quiet insults, Edward accept uncomfortable compromises, and Camilla's influence reach deeper into private family life. Now, Louise faced an impossible choice: preserve royal peace, or protect the parents who had protected her. Louise understood the fragile position her parents occupied. Edward had served the crown without building a rival center of influence, while Sophie had become one of the family's most dependable figures without demanding reward. The crown meant the monarch and the institution around him, not merely a symbol. Their loyalty gave Charles stability, yet that same loyalty made them easier to pressure. Sophie sat beside her daughter after the confrontation and admitted what silence had cost. She explained that Camilla believed unity around Charles required control over invitations, seating plans, and appearances. The queen consort, meaning the king's wife, not a ruling monarch, treated independent household choices as challenges. Sophie feared Edward would someday be forced to choose between his brother and his wife. Her voice broke when she confessed that patience had begun to feel like surrender. Edward stood alone near the window, twisting his wedding ring, while Charles waited in another room. He loved his brother, and had spent years protecting the king from family embarrassment. Yet Louise's words forced him to see how often Sophie had paid for that loyalty. Every compromise preserved royal calm outside their home, while deepening the wound inside it. Camilla delivered the warning earlier that afternoon, during a private conversation in the library. She told Sophie that continued resistance could affect which relatives were included in future family events. The message sounded controlled, but its meaning was unmistakable. Cooperation would protect belonging, and defiance could cost it. Louise heard the entire exchange through the half-open door. She listened as her mother answered with dignity, refusing to trade family independence for invitations. Minutes later, she watched Sophie enter a washroom and quietly cry. That witnessed moment became the source of Louise's certainty, because she later repeated the exact wording to Edward in a private recorded family account. Louise then told her father the truth he had avoided. The trouble had begun months earlier, when Camilla changed one deeply meaningful memorial ceremony and humiliated Sophie before the family. The confrontation at Windsor was not a sudden act of rebellion. It was the final consequence of one cold evening, when a chair was moved, a promise was broken, and Louise realized her mother's place in the family was being deliberately diminished. Every family conflict has a moment that later feels inevitable. The second, when courtesy stops being kindness and becomes permission. For Lady Louise, that moment arrived during a winter memorial dinner at Windsor. The room had been prepared, the family had assembled, and Sophie believed she would sit beside Edward as promised. Then, minutes before the doors opened, an aide silently lifted her chair and carried it to the far end of the table. Edward felt the meaning immediately. The Windsor Winter Memorial Dinner was a private family ceremony held to honor Prince Philip's legacy, and a memorial dinner simply means a formal meal arranged to remember someone who has died. His father's memory made the evening sacred to him. Sophie had helped organize the readings, selected words Philip loved, and believed the gathering might heal old divisions rather than deepen them. Sophie entered, saw the changed arrangement, and stopped. Camilla's preferred guest now occupied the place beside Edward, while her own chair waited far from the central family group. She did not protest. She crossed the room, forced a careful smile, and sat where she had been moved because she refused to turn Philip's remembrance into an argument about herself. Louise watched everything. She saw her mother hide humiliation behind calm before the people she loved most, and she saw Edward repeatedly look down the table with guilt he could not conceal. After dinner, the young royal found Sophie alone in a corridor, gripping the back of a chair, as though strength had suddenly become something she had to borrow. Camilla later called the change a matter of precedence. Precedence is the formal order that decides where royal family members sit or stand during official occasions. Yet an unsigned seating memorandum, a written plan showing approved places, proved Sophie's original seat had already been confirmed. The alteration came less than 20 minutes before the doors opened, leaving no honest chance to challenge it. Edward's office received the final proof by mistake. An aide forwarded a message ordering, "Move Sophie away from the central family group. The arrangement must reflect the new household." Louise later found the printed copy in her father's study, and that documented instruction stripped away every excuse Camilla had offered. Louise made her promise that night. She told Sophie, "The next time they try to separate us, I will not sit quietly." Months later, Camilla's demand over another memorial guest list gave her the moment to keep it. The empty chair had become a symbol Louise could not forget, and when she finally faced Camilla again, every suppressed insult returned with enough force to turn a family discussion into Windsor's most personal confrontation. Once the drawing room doors closed, titles lost their protection. There were no cameras, no advisors, and no carefully arranged public smiles. Only Louise, Camilla, Sophie, Edward, and Charles standing within a few feet of one another. The silence stretched until Camilla demanded an apology. Instead, Louise stepped closer, placed both hands on the back of a chair, and explained exactly why she believed the Queen Consort was tearing their family apart. Camilla insisted that Louise withdraw her statement and accept that royal gatherings belonged under the king's household. That household meant the staff and offices supporting the monarch's official and private duties. Charles remained silent, allowing his wife to defend herself, but his stillness did not calm the room. It made every word feel judged. Louise answered carefully, She was not claiming Windsor Castle, challenging the crown, or questioning Charles's position. The crown meant the monarchy as an institution, not simply the person wearing it. Her words concerned the emotional home Sophie and Edward had built, a place of loyalty, privacy, and trust that Camilla had entered through pressure, altered invitations, and division. Sophie begged her daughter to stop before the confrontation damaged her future. Louise turned toward her mother and said watching her endure humiliation had already caused more damage than speaking ever could. The trusted confidant flinched, because the truth came from the child she had tried hardest to protect. Camilla lost control. She accused Louise of misunderstanding adult responsibilities and being shaped by private resentment. The young royal's eyes filled with tears, yet she held the queen consort's gaze. Edward then reached for the sealed folder, broke its fastening, and removed revised guest lists, seating plans, and written instructions from her office. Charles read one message twice. It ordered staff to invite Edward without Sophie to a small family consultation because her presence might complicate alignment. A family consultation was simply a private meeting used to settle shared royal matters. The king set the paper down, but his silence now carried anger rather than caution. Edward confirmed through the documented correspondence that the instruction had not been a misunderstanding. Sophie looked toward Charles, while Louise waited for someone older to say what everyone younger had already understood. Camilla opened her mouth, then stopped. No one moved, because a denial now carried consequences far beyond that locked room. Charles finally turned to his wife and asked whether she had personally approved the message. Her delayed answer changed everything. Louise had entered the room as the accused, but one printed sentence reversed the balance of power, forcing Charles to decide whether protecting his wife mattered more than confronting what had been done in his name. Power inside a royal family rarely announces itself with shouting. Sometimes it appears when a king removes his glasses, folds a document, and chooses whom to believe. Charles now faced a private crisis, more dangerous than any public criticism. If he dismissed Louise, he risked confirming every fear she had expressed. If he challenged Camilla, he would expose a fracture within his own marriage and admit that the household had acted without proper restraint. Charles held the final authority over household procedure, yet he had allowed many private arrangements to pass through Camilla and her senior aides. Household procedure meant the rules used to manage royal duties, invitations, staff, and family events. That delegation had once seemed practical. Now it looked dangerous, because decisions had been made in his name without his direct review. Edward made the evidence harder to ignore. He had never built a rival court, challenged his brother, or used family tension for influence. A royal court simply meant the circle of staff and advisors surrounding a senior royal. His quiet reliability made the messages more disturbing, because pressure had been aimed at the household least likely to fight back. Charles read the communications again and felt guilt settle over him. His silence had not remained neutral. Others had treated it as permission. He looked toward Edward and understood that his younger brother had protected him from embarrassment for months, while Sophie had absorbed the cost. Edward met his gaze but offered no rescue. Camilla defended herself with growing anger. She argued that she had acted to prevent competing loyalties and preserve unity around the king. Charles asked why unity required excluding Sophie from conversations involving her own husband. The queen consort's voice hardened, because the question turned her strategy into something personal and cruel. Charles summoned the household secretary and pointed to the phrase, "complicate alignment." The courtier hesitated, glanced toward Camilla, and confirmed through the documented office record that the instruction had come directly from her private office. The room changed at once. Charles made his decision. No member of Camilla's staff could alter Wessex invitations, seating plans, or private arrangements without written approval from both Edward and Sophie. The order stopped the interference, but Louise heard what was missing. The king demanded compliance, not remorse. She watched Sophie lower her eyes and realized that protection without acknowledgement could still preserve appearances while leaving the deepest injury untouched inside their family for years. The king had redrawn the boundaries of authority, yet the absence of two simple words, "I am sorry," left Sophie wounded, Camilla defensive, and Louise determined that the emotional truth would not be buried beneath administrative language. By the following morning, Windsor had changed. Staff members lowered their voices when Louise entered a corridor. Invitations were rechecked, private offices exchanged urgent calls, and members of the family learned that Charles had restricted Camilla's influence over the Wessex household. No public statement had been released, yet the consequences were already spreading. The confrontation was no longer contained inside one drawing room. Every silence had become a declaration of loyalty. The household secretary moved first. He circulated a private directive confirming that Edward and Sophie would approve their own engagements, guest lists, and seating arrangements without outside interference. A private directive is a written internal order sent to royal offices rather than the public. The decision mattered because it restored control to the family that had lost it, and warned every palace office that Camilla's influence now had limits. Anne called Edward and asked whether the communications were genuine. William requested a private copy of the directive soon afterward. Their interest carried weight because both understood that pressure placed on one household could eventually reach another. Edward confirmed the records were authentic, and the concern spreading through the family became impossible to dismiss. Camilla entered her morning sitting room and found two family consultations postponed. She sat beside an untouched breakfast tray, furious that Louise's words had weakened her authority overnight. The queen consort had expected private resistance to fade. Instead, doors were closing, meetings were moving, and people who once remained quiet were beginning to compare experiences. Louise felt the cost when Sophie called in tears. She feared her daughter would be painted as disrespectful, unstable, or hungry for attention. The young royal admitted she was frightened, but said silence would have taught everyone that dividing their family carried no consequence. Sophie heard the resolve in her voice, and understood that protection now required honesty. Edward then received a private warning from an aide at another royal residence. The courtier explained through a documented office call that similar pressure had been used to alter a Christmas invitation. The problem was larger than one chair, one dinner, or one wounded household. Charles acted again. He ordered Camilla to miss a planned household coordination session until the full chain of communications had been examined. She received the instruction in writing and crushed the corner of the page in her hand. Sophie refused to retreat. She asked Louise to meet privately that evening and promised an honest answer about whether reconciliation was still possible. The palace machinery had begun moving against the interference, but the story's direction would ultimately be decided not by secretaries or directives, but by a mother and daughter speaking alone without titles between them. That evening, Sophie entered Louise's room without an aide, closed the door, and sat beside her daughter on the edge of the bed. For the first time since the confrontation, there were no officials to persuade, no monarch to protect, and no queen consort to challenge. Sophie took Louise's hands and thanked her for defending their family. Then she asked something far more difficult, not whether Louise could fight, but whether she could leave room for forgiveness. Sophie spoke with quiet care. The household restrictions had achieved what their family needed, because Charles had accepted that outside interference had gone too far. Those restrictions were private limits placed on palace staff, meaning no one could alter their invitations, seating, or family plans without approval. Edward and his wife had regained control of their home, but victory without mercy could become another kind of harm. Louise listened, still carrying the anger of the drawing room. Her mother told her that defending a family did not require destroying another person's dignity. Camilla had caused real pain, yet public humiliation would only create a fresh cycle of resentment. Sophie knew what humiliation felt like, and she refused to use the same weapon against the woman who had wounded her. Louise finally revealed the fear beneath her courage. She had worried that Edward might one day choose royal duty over Sophie, not because he loved her less, but because years of pressure could make surrender feel normal. Each altered invitation and every forced separation had made the young royal fear that their family could be divided slowly, without one dramatic moment anyone could stop. Sophie pulled her daughter close. She promised that neither rank, pressure, nor palace expectation could erase the marriage and family she had built with Edward. Louise finally cried, releasing the fury she had controlled before Charles and Camilla. Her tears were not weakness. They were proof that courage had cost her something. A knock broke the silence. An aide delivered a handwritten note from Camilla, requesting a private meeting with Sophie and Louise, without Charles or palace staff. The message offered no excuse. It asked only for honest conversation. Louise agreed, but set one condition. Camilla had to acknowledge the chair removed at Philip's memorial dinner. Reconciliation could not begin with denial. Sophie folded the note and placed it beside the lamp. Both understood what waited next. The boundary between protection and punishment had never felt thinner or more dangerous. Louise had proven she could confront power, but her greatest test now waited in a quiet room where Camilla would have no staff to blame and no title strong enough to replace a sincere apology. The private confrontation could not remain private. By sunrise, Louise's sentence had crossed the palace gates and become the defining royal phrase of the day. Commentators repeated it, newspapers printed it in enormous type, and crowds gathered to debate whether a quiet young woman had defended her family or broken an ancient code of obedience. Yet beneath the noise, one image captured the nation's attention more powerfully than any headline. Broadcasters received a detailed account of the Windsor exchange, including Louise's exact words and Charles's decision to restrict interference in the Wessex household. That household meant the private family office and arrangements managed by Edward and Sophie. The story mattered because it showed a younger royal challenging influence inside the monarchy, while the king quietly accepted that boundaries had been crossed. Buckingham Palace responded with careful restraint. The palace, which serves as the monarch's main official headquarters, described the confrontation as a private family discussion and confirmed that household arrangements had been clarified. The statement denied nothing, defended no one, and avoided criticizing Louise. Its silence around Camilla became almost as powerful as the words it contained. Louise watched the coverage beside Sophie and felt herself becoming someone she barely recognized. Commentators called her courageous, reckless, loyal, and rebellious. She had spoken to protect her mother, not to become the center of a national argument. Sophie held her hand as the young royal admitted that public praise felt nearly as frightening as palace anger. Camilla read the morning papers alone. She stopped at a photograph of Louise holding Sophie's hand after a church service and understood what the public saw. Not disobedience, but unity. The queen consort had expected authority to define the story. Instead, affection had defeated rank. The fictional London Chronicle delivered the sharpest blow. Its front page declared, "Louise draws the line," above an image of Windsor's closed gates, and the words, "I refuse to let Camilla divide our home." The headline turned a private sentence into a national verdict. Crowds gathered outside Windsor Castle and placed small white flowers near the public barrier. One handwritten card read, "A family should never require permission to remain a family." Louise saw the message during a recorded broadcast and lowered her eyes. That afternoon, Sophie walked beside her daughter into a private sitting room. Camilla was already waiting beside the chair linked to the original humiliation. While the country argued over winners and losers, the three women at the center of the crisis prepared to settle the matter in the only place where headlines carried no authority, face to face, with the painful truth finally spoken aloud. Camilla did not begin with an excuse. When Louise and Sophie entered the sitting room, she rose, moved from the fireplace, and looked at Louise. Between them stood the same style of chair removed from Sophie's place months earlier. Camilla rested one hand upon it, took a breath, and admitted the decision had been hers, and it had been wrong. Sophie sat with Louise beside her. Charles, Edward, aides, and household officials were absent. No title, secretary, or palace procedure could soften what followed. Household officials are staff who manage royal duties and private arrangements, but none could speak for the three women facing one another. Camilla admitted authorizing the seating change at Philip's memorial dinner and approving messages that treated Sophie as an obstacle. She explained that she had feared divided authority around Charles, yet accepted that fear did not excuse humiliation. The queen consort did not blame staff or hide behind custom. Sophie spoke plainly. She described the pain of honoring Philip while being separated from Edward at the table. The chair had not wounded her most. The message behind it had. Her loyalty could be welcomed when useful, while her place in the family remained conditional. Louise delivered her final truth. She told Camilla that her statement had never been an attack on the crown or an attempt to harm Charles. The crown means the monarchy as an institution, not only the person wearing it. She had spoken because a home divided slowly could disappear before anyone admitted it was being dismantled. Camilla apologized to Sophie, then Louise. Silence followed until Sophie asked whether every attempt to influence their private family life would end permanently. The answer came without hesitation. Camilla agreed that Edward and Sophie alone would govern their household, invitations, and family commemorations. She promised that exclusion and precedence, the formal order deciding royal position, would never again separate them through pressure or influence. Camilla pulled the chair forward and invited Sophie to sit beside Louise. She did not accept the offered hand, but she took the seat. The gesture did not erase the past. It proved the injury had been named and the boundary respected. Louise changed the monarchy by proving loyalty was not silent obedience. Camilla lost the power to divide their home. Sophie regained her unquestioned place. Edward no longer had to choose, and Charles learned that pressure could never create unity. The crisis ended not with Camilla's defeat or Louise's triumph, but with one permanent truth. The crown could organize duty, ceremony, and precedence, but it could never decide who belonged inside another person's home. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.